There is a man who fought over 60 duels in his lifetime and never lost a single one. He did not win through luck. He did not win because he was born with some extraordinary gift that others lacked. He won because he forged himself deliberately, relentlessly, over decades into something that could not be defeated. His name was Miyamoto Musashi, and he left behind something far more valuable than his undefeated record. He left behind a philosophy written in a small book called The Book of Five Rings, a guide not just for sword fighting, but for mastering the self. These are his 7 rules. Not commandments handed down from the heavens, but lessons carved out of a lifetime of solitude, hardship, and total commitment to a single path. Rule 1. Accept everything just as it is. Musashi lived in feudal Japan, a world of constant war, shifting loyalties, and sudden death. He was orphaned young, survived brutal duels before he was fully grown, and spent long stretches of his life utterly alone. And yet, what comes through in his writing is not bitterness. It is a deep, almost radical acceptance of things as they are. He wrote, "Do not seek to possess either goods or fiefs for your old age." He was not advising poverty. He was advising freedom. Freedom from the anxiety of clinging to outcomes you cannot control. Most of us exhaust ourselves resisting reality. We fight what is already done. We mourn what is already lost. We demand the world conform to what we expected, and when it doesn't, we call it failure. Musashi had a different standard. He called it perceiving the world without illusion, not pessimism precision. See what is, not what you wish were true, and you can respond to it with full power. Rule 2. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Musashi's life was one of extraordinary austerity. He is said to have never married. He bathed rarely. He wore plain clothes. He ate simply and slept where he could. At first glance, this looks like self-punishment, but look more closely and you see something else entirely. A man who had learned that pleasure, especially easy, automatic pleasure, dulls the edge of the mind. In his final document, the Dokudo written just days before his death, he listed 21 precepts for living. Almost every one of them was about restraint. Do not act following customary beliefs. Do not pursue the taste of good food. Do not hold on to possessions you no longer need. This was not asceticism for its own sake. It was a recognition that the person chasing comfort can never build real strength. The warrior who craves ease before the battle is already at a disadvantage. Every time you choose difficulty over ease, you are, in Musashi's terms, sharpening your sword. Every time you choose comfort when effort is required, you are letting the blade dull. Rule 3. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. There is a particular kind of trap that competent people fall into. They become obsessed with their own image, with how they are perceived, with protecting their reputation, their status, their self-conception. Musashi had every reason to fall into this trap. He was the greatest swordsman in Japan. His reputation was literally forged in mortal combat. And yet his writing contains almost no self-glorification. He wrote, "Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world." This is not false modesty. It is a strategic posture, the recognition that the ego that needs constant feeding is an ego that will eventually panic under pressure. The samurai who fights to protect his reputation fights with divided attention. Half his mind is on the opponent. The other half is watching the audience. Musashi fought with everything. He could only do that because he had released the need to perform. Rule 4. Think of what is right and true. In the strategy sections of the Book of Five Rings, Musashi returns again and again to one idea: clarity. Not cleverness, not complexity, clarity. He studied strategy the way a scholar studies texts obsessively from every angle for decades. But the goal was always simplification, to see through the noise of the moment to what was actually true about the situation in front of him. He wrote, "The ultimate aim of martial arts is not having to use them. The sword was a tool for reaching a place beyond the sword, a state of mind where perception was so clear that conflict could be resolved before it escalated."
Most people avoid truth thinking because it is uncomfortable. It requires confronting what is actually happening in your work, your relationships, your habits, without the softening of self-deception. Musashi considered this confrontation to be the most important daily practice a person could have. Rule 5. Become acquainted with every art. Musashi was not merely a swordsman. He was a painter, a sculptor, a calligrapher, a poet. He created artworks that are still celebrated in Japan today, not as curiosities from a famous warrior, but as genuine masterworks. This was intentional. He believed that a person confined to a single domain of skill becomes fragile, unable to see beyond the conventions of their own field. Cross-training the mind through multiple disciplines was, for him, part of strategic development. He wrote, "Research the ways of all professions, not to become a dilettante, but to develop what he called the spirit of things in general, the ability to perceive underlying patterns that transcend any single discipline. When you learn only one thing deeply, you start to see everything as a nail because your only tool is a hammer." Musashi understood that genuine mastery requires breadth as well as depth, a wide base that makes the peak more stable. Rule 6. Know the ways of all professions, but do not be enslaved by them. There is a difference between understanding how other people think and being controlled by how other people think. Musashi was keenly aware of this distinction. He was famous for arriving late to his duels, sometimes hours late. His most celebrated duel against Sasaki Kojiro saw him arrive by boat nearly 2 hours after the appointed time. Kojiro was furious. Musashi was calm. What looked like disrespect was strategy. Musashi had studied Kojiro's psychology. and knew that waiting would corrode his composure. He turned convention, the expected punctuality of an honorable duel, into a weapon. In every field, there are unwritten rules, things that everyone does because everyone has always done them. Musashi's instruction was to know these rules completely, precisely so that you could decide which ones to follow and which ones to use against your opponent. Rule 7. Never stray from the way. The final rule is also the most demanding. Musashi called his philosophy the way of the warrior, but he was adamant that a way must be chosen and then never abandoned. Not for comfort, not for fear, not for convenience. He wrote the Dokodo, those 21 precepts, when he knew he was dying of what is believed to have been thoracic cancer. He was in pain, he was weakening, and he still sat down to write his philosophy out completely. The word Dokodo means the path of aloneness, or the way to go alone. It is not a melancholy title, it is an honest one. Musashi had understood something that most people spend their whole lives avoiding, that the truest path is one you walk yourself. There is a particular comfort in being led, in having someone else decide, in following the current. But that comfort, Musashi believed, is the thing that keeps most people from ever discovering what they are actually capable of. He spent years meditating in a cave, the Raigando cave on Kyushu, writing, thinking, reducing his philosophy to its essence. Not because the world had abandoned him, but because he had chosen solitude in order to see clearly. These 7 rules: accept what is, refuse easy pleasure, hold yourself lightly, think what is true, broaden your craft, understand convention, never abandon your path, are not about becoming a samurai. They are about becoming undeniable, becoming so grounded in your own purpose and so clear in your perception that no circumstance, no loss, no adversary can knock you off your footing. Musashi died in 1645. He was 61 years old, ancient by the standards of a man who had spent 40 years in regular mortal combat. He died peacefully, seated in his cave, having written down everything he knew. What he knew was this: the greatest victory is not over your opponent, it is over the version of yourself that wants to quit, that wants comfort, that wants to be told what to do. Win that battle every day, and every other battle becomes manageable. If this reached you at the right time, subscribe. We explore the deepest questions of human existence every week so you can live yours more fully.